I'm also going to try to have the chat open. So, okay, cool. All right. So thank you, Katie, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here today and talk a little bit about this topic. And I wanted to give a little bit more like background on how I got so interested in and intrigued in waste management. So Katie mentioned I will be finishing my degree in environmental biology and plant biology in just like 5 short weeks. So really excited for that. But rewind to when I was a freshman, one of my community sustainability classes came for a tour of the MSU Recycling Center, and that is when I met Katie. She mentioned that they were hiring, one thing led to another, and in 2019, I found myself on the recycling outreach team at MSU's Recycling Center. And this position was a lot of fun. You can see me here, I'm doing a waste audit, and then down here, I'm like in one of the plastic bunkers at our drop-off center, fishing out some contamination. I think I'm pulling out like plastic film that was just really bent, not make it into the MRF. But yeah, so a lot of fun. But I wasn't always goofing off in this position. I did learn just so much during my time on the recycling outreach team. And I became intimate with the challenges that the challenges around consumer engagement when it came to waste management. Just the nature of how complex the recycling sector is made it difficult for me to understand it, let alone like translate that to the public. So we had challenges with the shifting of material values on the market and what our vendors were accepting, what they were willing to take from the MRF. And so that made it hard for me and my team to know what was actually getting recycled, and then added another layer of trying to reflect that to the public. And then consumers are also bombarded by just so much messaging around like what should be put in the recycling bin. And a lot of that comes from variation from what is accepted from recycling center to recycling center. So I guess bottom line, I learned that our current economic supply chain paradigm really does not make recycling easier on the consumer. And as I began to research more about waste management and the circular economy, I identified that there are a lot of challenges with sustainable waste management. I think the overarching challenge and what I really want to see progress the most around is that our waste management strategies focus on mitigating rather than preventing waste. So we all learn the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but it seems like a lot of these initiatives are only focused on recycling. And these initiatives are also campaigned solely or primarily towards consumers, which are only one part of that supply chain. So the consumers alone really aren't equipped or empowered to solve our waste management problems. Even if we all recycled perfectly, I don't think it would be enough to manage waste at the level that we need it. So in comes extended producer responsibility. So extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is part of the larger economic paradigm shift that is the circular economy. And how I can kind of simply put this is that extended producer responsibility is this concept where producers are responsible for the impacts of their products both up and downstream of production. So producers can leverage and communicate and collaborate with other parts of the supply chain so that they can mitigate the negative social, environmental, and economic aspects that come with the life cycle of their product. And the goal of this is to make products safer for people and the planet, from design to disposal and every part in between. And I think this can sound a little abstract, and that's kind of because it is. EPR is a framework for waste management. It's a strategy for addressing waste at the source by leveraging more parts of that supply chain. And it's a tool for shifting some of that responsibility off of the consumers. When we're putting this responsibility, some of it, back into the hands of producers, we can alleviate some of that confusion and frustration that comes when we're trying to dispose of things and manage things at their end of life. So EPR, it's a framework, but it can appear in a variety of different ways. I've tried to break it down tonight into 2 main categories, being physical responsibility and financial responsibility. And I think you'll pick up also that within these things can be mandatory or voluntary. So mandatory, like laws and legislation that are imposed on the producer, or voluntary, where the producers maybe join like a product group where they want to do the right thing, or they want to make their brand look good, whatever reason, voluntary engaging in EPR. So let's look first then at physical responsibility. So physical responsibility comes with what's called take back programs. So at the end of life, the consumer is somehow returning the product back to the producer. The producer is literally taking back the product. And I have some examples that I could think of, and I thought that illustrated this well. But if you guys have engaged in take back products, you start thinking of some as I'm going through this, take back programs, put some links in the chat. I would love to look into them, and I'm sure other people here would also be interested in looking in them. So definitely drop links, drop resources. I love to see it. Okay, so looking at H&M, that's my first example. H&M is like a clothing brand, it's a store. They were under a lot of fire the last few years about their role in fast fashion and just the impacts that unsustainable fashion and textiles can have on the environment. So they really ramped up this program, the Close the Loop garment collection, where you could bring in a bag of your used H&M clothes and drop them off to these bins that they had by the register. And I think at one point you could even, like, if you brought a bag back, you got a discount at the store. So they were really trying to do stuff for their image here. But it was effective. In 2019 alone, they collected what was equivalent to 145 million t-shirts. So this is nothing to sneeze at. They're doing great work. But I think brands usually more commonly take the approach that we see here with Mattel and HP. So Mattel, at the end of life with their toys, they're a toy brand, you can ship Mattel brand toys back to them. With HP, when your ink and toner cartridges are empty, you can put them in these envelopes and ship them back to them. So usually this like shipment way is how it would go. There are two main things about physical responsibility that I want to highlight. And first one being a limitation. You can see that each of these examples is brand specific. So Mattel is only taking back Mattel brand toys. HP is only taking HP ink and toner cartridges. So there are some limitations to this. It's not covering the entire waste stream, just this one brand. But one of the great advantages of physical responsibility and in that brand specific responsibility is that it creates a very simple single stream. Imagine, I don't know how many of you guys have seen the inside of a Murph, but imagine an ink cartridge, mostly empty, but not completely empty, ending up in that bin going through the Murph. That sounds like a nightmare. It sounds like a huge mess, and I don't want to deal with it. Same with clothes, like that's going to get all caught up in the machinery, create a huge mess. So when these brands are able to take back their product in a single stream, that just makes things easier on the Murph. And when it comes to like toys, in the example of Mattel, these are made out of plastics that aren't necessarily valuable for recycling centers. So the fact that the brand is taking them back just ensures that they're actually being disposed of instead of a recycling center receiving them and then not really having an end market for them. So then moving on to the financial responsibility. This is the other category of EPR. This can look like program funding or taxes, where these brands are paying into some pot of money that is going towards funding collection events usually, or like taxes that get disseminated into local governments. They can do those events. And a federal example of financial responsibility is like pharmaceuticals. So you might have in the past been told to maybe flush your old pills or like put them in kitty litter and then put the kitty litter in the trash. But when the Secure and Responsible Drug Disposal Act of 2010 passed, we started seeing medical waste collection initiatives pop up all over the country. And aside for some like legal battles that still go back and forth in California, it's pretty universally agreed upon that the manufacturers and retailers of these pharmaceuticals are legally responsible for funding these medical waste management initiatives. So I also want to highlight then the Product Stewardship Institute. the Product Stewardship Institute, PSI, is a organization of businesses, non-government organizations, academics, et cetera, that are just really big advocates and have been like fundamental in pushing EPR concepts in the country. And they're looking to expand that type of like legal financial obligation to other waste streams, including packaging and paper products, which is sometimes referred to as PPP. So packaging and paper products is super common in consumer goods. Almost anything you buy, I feel, probably has some component that could be considered PPP. So a lot of these things are in need of management. But there are two big things that financial EPR could help with in this, in that some people don't have access to recycling at all. So financial EPR on these products could start recycling programs for them and get things off the ground. And then secondly, sometimes packaging and paper products, like with the example of Mattel's toys, they're not profitable and they don't have an end market. So recycling centers can't always recycle them. So financial EPR could help a recycling center actually properly manage these things without going broke. Another waste stream that the Product Stewardship Institute and other EPR advocates want to expand financial responsibility towards is household hazardous waste. So think of like that half gallon of paint that you have sitting in your basement, or that almost empty bottle of Roundup or whatever. That's household hazardous waste. And traditionally, it's been on the local governments to have collection programs for this. We all agree that there should be collection for household hazardous waste, but sometimes local governments don't have the resources that they need to properly care for these. So here I have the Muskegon County, my hometown's recycling event for collecting household hazardous waste. And you might notice that there's one date on here with pretty limited hours. So this municipality just does not have the resources to host more than 2 of these events a year. It's a biannual thing. So financial responsibility, EPR, could help improve these and have more of these collection events throughout the year. And I think, Katie, maybe you're someone at the Ingham County Household Hazardous Waste Collection event is coming up. So if someone could drop that link, that would be great.
Yep, that one's included there. And there's a couple other examples that people threw out that they have heard of or used. One was just mentioned that due to COVID, H&M had to suspend their textile take back program. And then Rich also mentioned the Crayola take back program.
Nice. Yeah, sorry, chat notifications weren't coming up for me. Thank you for flagging me.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So those are all examples of like mandatory EPR that's usually imposed by government and legislation, but there's voluntary financial EPR as well. How many of you have heard of TerraCycle? They take back lots of cool things. Anybody ever recycle anything weird with TerraCycle? I remember like my freshman year when I was like super big into recycling, still am. My friends and I like collected a bunch of cigarette butt litters and returned them to TerraCycle. So this company does a lot of really cool things. So TerraCycle is financial EPR in that they partner with product brands. So partner being like they're funded by these brands so that they can collect and manage difficult to recycle products and packaging. So I think this is a really neat concept, and I like that it's voluntary, but I do want to like offer a disclaimer. We talk about EPR, and one of the great things about it is that it has the ability to influence design. So the idea is that when a producer is responsible for the end of life of a product, they're going to make it easier to manage. They're going to make something that's easy to recycle. But there's this trend that I'm seeing with TerraCycle, which is kind of the exact opposite. So this example I pulled off of their website is P&G is experimenting with these like plastic pouches for some of their products. So your Dawn dish soap used to come in like a plastic bottle, which was easy to recycle. And now it comes in this like pouch. Which is not easy to recycle, but because TerraCycle is collecting it and managing it for them, they're like, oh, it's fine, but not everybody has access to TerraCycle. So I don't know, just some food for thought around this, that EPR isn't always like a one size fits all, and you definitely, it's more complex than just like putting a Band-Aid over it. Okay. So that is financial and physical EPR. I want to now talk about an example of EPR that like really caught my attention when I was first getting into this concept and like learning about this concept, and that this was EPR on carton recycling. So how many, I know we're calling in from a lot of different areas. So how many of you have access to carton recycling? Like you can drop it off somewhere, or you can put it curbside. And I'm talking about like these waxy boxes that like milk comes in. Yeah, Rich does. Thanks, MSU. Like juice boxes, soup sometimes comes in these. Not in Alma. Okay. All right. So I was, kind of astonished when I learned that 61% of Americans have access to some type of carton recycling, which just really doesn't make sense to me because everything that I know about recycling screams that these products are not recyclable. I have this like kind of anatomy of a shelf stable carton here, and you can see that it has plastic, paper, more plastic, aluminum, and then another layer of plastic. So kind of the rule of thumb for recycling is that if it's a mixed material and you can't separate the materials, it's not recyclable. So think about a chip bag, right? It's plastic on the outside, aluminum on the inside. You can't separate it. Don't recycle it. I would never tell you to put that in the recycling bin. But somehow these really complex and super useful at that. These are like really useful consumer goods. These really complex packagings are somehow recyclable. And I was like, how did this happen? And spoiler alert, it was EPR. So the story of carton recycling in the United States is really the story of the Carton Council of North America. So in around 2008, 2009, this group came together, carton manufacturers came together and formed the Carton Council with a commitment to increase carton recycling in the United States. So in 2008, about 18% of households could recycle their cartons. And a lot of like governments didn't, like recycling centers didn't consider cartons recyclable. So I think the Carton Council had like this moment of realization. And some will say it's because, oh, they wanted to like do the right thing. They're just like super environmentally conscious. But I think more likely was there were just, it's like business preservation. Governments were exploring the idea of like banning single-use plastic and like getting rid of plastic shopping bags at the grocery store. So I think they were trying to get ahead of this legislation and prove that their packaging could be sustainable. So they got together and they launched some campaigns, and in just 3 years, carton recycling increased from 18% in 2008 to 33% in 2011, which in just 3 years, I feel like that is pretty good for them. And so I want to talk through like three main things that they did to make this happen and that was successful in this endeavor. And first was investing in technology. So in 2008, there was only one paper pulping facility that considered cartons recycling, and they cartons recyclable. And they used this machine called a hydropulper that could separate the it's pretty much like a giant blender. It could separate the paper from the aluminum and the plastic and then harvest that paper pulp. So the first thing that they did, the Carton Council did, was invest and encourage in more facilities to get these hydropulpers. So by 2012, there are 8 of these facilities that can now harvest that paper pulp from cartons. They also, however, invested in technological innovation. So the Carton Council was a key funder in the production, like the funding of this the AMP Cortex robot. So this robot it learns through AI how to recognize different recyclable materials that come down the sort line and sort them out. This is one of the reasons why you don't want to flatten your cartons, so this robot can find it. So they made the technology necessary to reprocess their product more accessible, more widespread. But they also developed end markets for this reprocessed product. They had to prove that their product was worth recycling and that it was valuable. So those hydropulpers, right, that can extract the paper pulp, they can turn cartons then into paper towel, toilet paper, stuff like that. But that was leaving behind the aluminum and the plastic. So the Carton Council teamed up with a startup in Iowa, I believe called Continuous Building Materials, something like that, to develop these everboards, like the one that's being installed on a roof here. And an everboard is made out of shredded and compact cartons. So it's using the whole carton. And this opened up a whole nother recycling pathway for cartons. And with this, the Carton Council, like they're starting to really prove to the recycling sector that their product is valuable, that it's worth recycling. But that was only one part of it, right? There's other pieces to this puzzle. And so they had a lot of consumer engagement efforts as well. And in 2019, although access to carton recycling in America reached 61%, the Carton Council kept pushing. They have educational campaigns that are funded by them, and their website is very built with consumers in mind. When you go there, you can search if there is a carton recycling facility in your area. And if there's not, they direct you to another web page that first lets you sign a petition to declare that you want carton recycling in your area. And then two, directs you to a short list of facilities where you can mail your cartons. So some of you were saying, oh, I don't have carton recycling. Well, if you want, you can box them up and ship them to the Emmett County Recycling Center in Harbor Springs, Michigan, and they will recycle them for you. So yes, this story is financial EPR mostly. And I think it's just a really good example of how when a brand decides to take on some initiative of their product beyond just manufacturing, they can do really great things. They established and stimulated pretty much a whole new recycling waste stream. And I think this like invest, develop, engage model could be applied to other waste streams in EPR. I don't know, it just seems like a really good tool here. So yeah, that is the story of carton recycling in the United States. And I kind of want to just close this like lecture-y part of the presentation with some like summary statements. The most overarching one being that we need to see a shift in our waste management strategies away from mitigation and towards prevention. And EPR can be a tool in doing that, as it shifts that physical and financial burden off of consumers and leverages other parts of the supply chain. And the goal, therefore, of EPR being to make products safer for people and the planet, from disposal to design and everything in between. So yeah, that is my presentation. I'm gonna stop screen sharing, pass it back to Katie. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Leah. That was a great overview of EPR, and I also appreciated the specific examples that you gave. I really think that hearing those specific stories helps to kind of bring it to life. You know, something that kind of sounds like policy on paper. It becomes way more clear when you throw out a couple examples like you did with some of those even big names that we know. So I just wanted to kind of transition into a little bit of dialogue. So Lee and I will kind of go through a couple topics that we talked about in advance, and then you know, would like to just open up for question and comments on the topic and on Leah's presentation as well. So if you would like to, you know, chime in, you are free to utilize the chat box as we've been doing, or to click on that reactions tab at the bottom and click raise hand. Or another way to do that is to go to your participant tab and click next to your name, click more, and hit raise hand as well. So I'm kind of curious, Leah, from your experience and your research, where do you think that EPR becomes the most effective?
Yeah, okay, so EPR is definitely, I think, most effective when the product doesn't have like a lot of value outside of like the recycling center doesn't have much value for it either. So like the Mattel and even with ink cartridges, those examples, recycling centers aren't getting anything from that. So that burden is very much on them. I think they're also in the same vein, especially effective when it comes to like high impact products. So when household hazardous waste slips through the cracks, that is a big issue for everyone. So shifting that responsibility back onto the consumer or back onto the producer, excuse me, just is a way of like really ensuring that doesn't happen, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a good point. So those items that we can't really readily handle at the materials recovery facility for various reasons, maybe they have multiple components to them, or there's a safety hazard, or there's just not much of a market for it, sounds like.
Yeah, especially the like with the cartons, multiple aspects of it. If it's like a high composite and e-waste as well. I didn't cover that today, but electronic waste, one of the reasons EPR is so effective for electronic waste is that there's just so many different components to it, and recycling centers can't break them up. It needs to be on the responsibility of the people who manufactured them to design systems of breaking them down.
And that one too is one of those that has a bit of risk associated with it if it's not handled properly. So you do definitely want to have those reputable sources to handle that. So then in talking about that, you know, I hadn't really thought of plastic bag recycling at the grocery store as being sort of form of voluntary EPR. Would you consider that to be?
Plastic bag recycling, like bringing it back?
Through, say, Meyer or Kroger?
Yeah, so that is like the retailer would be responsible for it, and physically you're taking it back. So I think that's a great example of maybe EPR that you engage in every day and don't even really think about it. Adding another layer of that could be having whoever actually makes the bag fund the retailers and taking that back. That could be another like added layer to add responsibility to that. But yeah, that is definitely an example of EPR in action.
Okay. And so where do you think that EPR is not the best solution? Are there certain things that it really just doesn't address, you know, gaps that are there?
Yeah, we talked about the gap with TerraCycle and how that isn't really pushing responsibility back on the consumer or back on the producer. Sorry. It sounds like a really great concept, and I like seeing these types of things go down. But if anything, it's enabling unsustainable design because it's shifted. This responsibility has shifted a little bit off of consumers, but not back into the producers. And I think there's also an issue when you don't have a plan for the product that you're collecting. So there was a pretty notable example in California where they imposed textile EPR and made carpet brands responsible for managing their carpets. And so these carpet brands had to recollect their carpets at the end of life, but there was no plan for how to reuse them or recycle them. So they ended up going to mostly like incineration, which you know, there are arguments for and against incineration, but in my opinion is not a sustainable like end of life for these products.
Yeah, I can share that sentiment as well. You know, it doesn't particularly bring it right back into the system as you would hope. So when you were talking about the TerraCycle and some of the challenges associated with that, made me think of as a materials recovery facility and the public drop-off center, that we do kind of grapple with some of those challenges that have come as a result of programs like TerraCycle. That again, we want to support recycling for any product that you can to try to keep it out of the landfill and keep it in circulation. But at the same time, it does cause some challenges for us when we get some questions about why don't we take certain things back here, say chip bags, for instance. You know, we got a lot of those questions, or well, if they can recycle it, why can't you, sort of thing. And so, kind of turning the frustration towards the recycling collectors, like the drop-off center sites and that sort of thing, or curbside programs, versus shifting it back to the producers. So, what do you think would be some ways that, those of us in the room who do either work in the industry or, who maybe are professors on campus or just in other areas of our lives, personal or, friends and family, how can we kind of bring this conversation back to don't blame the recycling industry. Let's put the responsibility back on the producer. So what are some ways we can talk about it day to day in our life with our friends and family?
Oh, geez. If I started talking about EPR with my friends, they would quickly be like, this waste management stuff again? Like, do you ever stop? But yeah, I think just a lot of people have this mentality like throw away equals go away, out of sight, out of mind. And so just understanding that, um, and like valuing that the things that you buy and the things that you use have a complete life cycle and you are just like one sliver in that. And understanding, especially with the TerraCycle example, that is another like voice that consumers are hearing, like, oh, these are actually recyclable. But with the example of chip bags, TerraCycle can take chip bags back because Lay's is funding them. Does Lay's want to fund the MSU Recycling Center? Great, then we can recycle your stuff. But that's just not the case. So I don't know, maybe just recognizing that these products are intentionally made and they're intentionally designed, usually for convenience or to be cheap. And we need to somehow, as consumers, whether it be like calling your representatives, voting with your dollar, whatever, we need to make it so that those are not the priority in design anymore, and that the priorities of design become sustainability and health for us and our planet.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I like that you, mentioned that we need to recognize that there is a cost associated with the materials that you take back, especially when there's not much of a market for those materials right off the bat, like chip bags, right? So like you said, that requires funding. And so reminding people who are frustrated about not being able to recycle certain things, that it does take money to make that happen. And the same goes for, like you said, even if you do work with TerraCycle to pay for the shipping of those items back to TerraCycle. And this is not to throw TerraCycle under the rug, but just to recognize the complexities and challenges around, I think it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of EPR, and these policies are one tool in, what we hope is a toolbox with many tools that will help us, implement a more, more stewardship around our environmental, our natural resources. So on that note, just could you talk a little bit about your research that you've done on circular economic practices and what you found is popular here in the Great Lakes region?
Yeah, so I will take any opportunity to talk about my recent research. It was really fun and exciting for me to be able to lead some research about circular economy at the Center for Community and Economic Development. What this looked like was we had just a very exploratory survey that we sent to state government environmental agencies. So like Eagle is the state environmental agency in Michigan. We reached out to all of the agencies in the Great Lakes region. So Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, New York, Michigan, obviously, Pennsylvania, but we didn't get a response from them. And we were asking them, how do they feel about the circular economy? What are their current waste management programs and what do they look like? And I think there was some pretty exposing but not shocking conclusions that came from this. One of them being that recycling continues to be the dominant strategy for waste management. When we asked them how much attention and funding goes to these different projects, every state said that most of their attention, funding, time, resources goes towards recycling initiatives. And they also echoed the sentiment that they are mostly campaigning towards consumers. We found that they're not, when given an opportunity, even they're not engaging producers at the level that we would want to see in more circular systems. We asked them also about the implementation of circular economy practices, and interestingly, all 7 states that responded said that they support some type of take back program. So that's great. This is physical EPR. we didn't specifically ask like what material waste streams they were supporting, but there's a good chance that it was e-waste, electronic waste, as I believe there's federal legislation around like some minimum requirement acceptance of these. But I think like the main conclusions from that study is that echoing this idea that we need to shift towards prevention rather than mitigation, and just embracing the opportunity that can come with leveraging more parts of the supply chain, including including producers and extended producer responsibility.
Thanks for that. Can you talk any about other legislation from anywhere? I mean, maybe like other states in the US that are maybe pending or have been introduced and then, did not go anywhere, kind of stalled out, to just kind of shine a light on some of the efforts around this?
Yeah, so that study focused mostly on the Great Lakes region, but there is a lot of motion and like traction for like circular economy and EPR across the nation. So not we found, but we know that EPR across the nation focuses mostly on electronics, tires, packaging, and specifically automotive batteries, like not batteries in general, but car batteries. So that's cool. There's an identifiable like pattern and like success with these different waste streams. So expanding those to more or all of the states would be really neat. And then just some great and super ambitious legislation that has been introduced on the federal level is the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act. It was reintroduced in this current congressional session, and that has so many great aspects of that in it, including EPR legislation. And I'm not sure if it's going to go anywhere. It was introduced in the last congressional session and didn't cause a lot of commotion, but this time around there seems to be a little bit more support from legislators, and many Michigan and otherwise environmental justice groups are like really pushing for that. So look into it, call your reps if that's something you like doing. I would love to see some or any, even if like 1/5 of what's in the Break Free from Plastic Act was actually passed. That would be like a monumental step for our nation and for sustainable waste management.
Yeah, all of these pieces are kind of stepping stones to get to, we, like you kind of started talking about the linear economy and how we're trying to shift towards a circular economy where we kind of keep things in circulation consistently, rather than just at the end disposing of them, and how we won't all of a sudden see a shift, right? We don't just one day wake up and it's black and white, linear economy turns circular economy, but these small little incremental changes. So I always like to hear about things that, like you just shared, that may have been introduced or are being talked about, but just don't have quite enough support to really get anywhere yet. So I'd just like to take a pause here for a moment and just let folks consider whether or not they want to ask a question. If you have anything, please feel free to drop it in the chat box, or go ahead and you can just unmute yourself or raise your hand if you'd like, and we can talk a little bit further. I know there's a couple other people here who are in this field somewhat, and just wondering if anybody would like to share any points that they have picked up along the lines of what we've been talking about, and like to share a little knowledge with us as well. I'll add a caveat to that question. If anybody would like to chime in and just share why they were interested in this topic, what sparked a curiosity around this. I understand it's maybe awkward to be speaking on this. We are on Facebook. I should probably mention that we are streaming live on Facebook. So we'll try it anyway.
Hey, Leah and Katie. So I'm not in the industry. I actually am a COVID casualty in the employment department, and I'm coming from sustainability from the standpoint of utilities. I was working with programs specifically with Consumers Energy, actually, that focused on education with regards to lighting and appliances, etc. So I have an interest in this because it all ties together. But I guess my larger question for the two of you, because you are embedded in the industry, I noticed that as a, for instance, Coca-Cola is going to be pulling multiple brands that they produce due to low sales. And that may or may not tie into what I'm ultimately asking. How do we form a movement, or how do we join an existing movement? How do I participate with getting manufacturers to be more responsible with what they're putting out? I'm looking at what MSU is restricting as far as taking back certain plastics. I also talked to the team at the Hazlitt Recycling Center when I started taking things there because of COVID. And they told me that some of the manufacturers don't have accountability for how they mark their plastics. So a number 6 that they put on the bottom of a container may not actually be a number 6 polymer. So as a consumer, so again, someone not in the industry, I'm a lay person, right? I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that a company like Coca-Cola, for instance, or even Johnson & Johnson could put a number on the bottom of a container and have it not correspond to its appropriate recycling opportunities. I don't know. Can you guys, I see Leah nodding her head. So obviously, like, I've hit a thread, but I find it all super overwhelming, honestly.
No, it is really overwhelming. And I think I am inclined to believe that a little bit of that confusion is intentional. I have, you're speaking of like these number codes, those are called the resin code. I have a lot of gripe with those as they are, as like they show this chasing arrow symbol, which we've come to associate with recycling, when that code was never meant to mean that this product was recyclable. That symbol is just like an industry sign of what this plastic type is. I think, you know, EPR is a tool that I'm specifically interested in because what you're saying, you know, as a consumer, it feels like you can't do much. And I don't think compared to other parts of the material supply chain, we just don't have the ability to like leverage to leverage our like power. We're not empowered to do this. We're not equipped with the tools necessary to do it. And so I think it takes, you know, what we can do is, I mean, individual action, recycle as best as you can, purchase things that you know or like feel can be recycled. So like simple things, avoiding plastic as possible, but also like EPR manifests usually as like some sort of policy legislation. So, you know, voting, engaging in environmental activism that pushes for those types of things. I don't know, it's a really sticky question. And when I figure out like how I as a consumer can influence those things, I will let the entire world know. But right now I'm just not feeling that power either. So I'm right there with you.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, obviously that doesn't super help, but at least I know I'm not alone. And I saw Rich pop up that, you know, he agrees that it's super confusing. So I don't know, maybe the 16 of us can, or 12 of us can just group together and start a grassroots movement that starts in Michigan, and we'll just figure it out, guys.
Well, there are lots of groups doing this work. And so I encourage you, you know, there's the Michigan Alliance for Justice in Climate. I'll put it in the chat, Magic. That is like the conglomerate of environmental justice groups from around the state. So I don't know, hook up with them. They do anything and everything related to environmental justice.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Thanks for asking that question, Brenda. I'm sure, you know, like you saw, that other people definitely are wondering the same thing. And one thing just to add to what Leah had said would be to support, try to support the use of recycled content in products. And I guess really the only way you could do that, aside from, you know, if something was to come up, a petition or a bill or something like that, that you could speak up for and support, would be to, you know, as I say, vote with your dollar. And so when you're out at the store or you're shopping online, to look for the items that, you know, mention that their product itself is made from recycled content, whatever that is, and or that the packaging is made from recycled content. And then, you know, again, to just keep an eye out for those packages that are, and I say packages, it's not only the package, could be the item too, but a lot of the waste is associated with the packaging. And so to look for those items that, you know, are not overly bulky, right? I think of something like, you know, a gift card that comes in a box, like it's this big, but it's in a piece of plastic this big. So trying to, you know, continue to vote with your dollar like that. And a note on the resin code, yeah, that they're not regulated in the sense of, so it's something that is, say, a number one plastic could include other polymers that would not be considered PET. So there's some, I guess, loosey-goosiness with that. And I can't speak in depth on that, but I do know, like you said, and also number 7 is represents other in large part. And so, you know, as more and more plastics and polymers are being manufactured and created, you know, for various reasons, maybe it's their flexibility, maybe it's their rigidity, whatever it may be, you know, plastics have different components, or the resins do. And so, you know, recyclers, you know, like us, we do face the challenge that we can't keep up with industry. You know, we don't have the same kind of dollar flow, for instance, as some of the manufacturers do, right? And so it's really difficult to turn on a dime like that. So just to add a tidbit more, and I just pause there in case you had anything else you wanted to add, Brenda.
I have a lot I want to add, but I'm not going to take up everybody's evening. No, it's, I guess, one of the things that I've been thinking about on an unrelated but related, hopefully you'll see the connection. I work with a couple of different groups and have a passion for trap, neuter, release for cats in general in communities. And what I find with rescues, and I guess I'm kind of hearing the same theme with recycling and with regards to waste, is that there isn't a really good way to share information within the community of the people that are interested in that particular focus. So it's actually that much harder to share it with the person that isn't dialed into it. So like for you to be able to, as MSU Recycling, communicate with, say, Hazlitt Recycling and make sure that you guys at least have the same information for one another, like that doesn't even happen. And that's like nobody's fault. I'm just saying, like, you know, it's kind of a, like I said, the person at Hazlitt Recycling had no clue about how to do plastics. And I even asked if like cereal boxes and soda boxes could go in with their cardboard recycling, because Hazlitt doesn't have a separate place for box board. And Granger is very specific about whether or not they will take things and then they'll scrap an entire batch if there's a certain percentage. And the staff at Hazlitt had no idea if pop carton containers or if box board could even go in there. So again, like if that person working at Hazlitt doesn't know, and they didn't say go to MSU because there's a separate spot, it's really hard for the average person. I don't know, communication is my degree background, and I can just tell you that I can't fix the whole world, but darn it, I'm trying like heck.
Yeah, it's a really tough piece. It's hard to even stay up with the changes just at our own center, if something was to change with the vendor, say, and let alone to start paying attention to what's going on with other drop-off sites, for instance, or curbside programs, because we do know that it does change. So it's definitely very valid point. And you know, the best thing to do would be to just call that particular or look online, you know, for the guide specifically. Yeah, and Leah saying, yeah, being bombarded with different messaging from every corner, right? I mean, there's just not a universal guide, unfortunately. I mean, there's some guidelines, right? But when you come down to the specific items, it gets a little bit more fuzzy. And just to read from the chat, Dave added, in terms of what can we do as consumers to support better choices on the front end of on producers decision making. It says he said to encourage people and to do yourself the favor of switching to items that are made in those packaging made in packaging that is more sustainable. He switched to Bright toothpaste and let Crest know why. That their packaging is not sustainable, not readily recyclable. So that tube is a challenge, but Bright toothpaste, or Bite toothpaste comes in a glass jar. And just to switch gears for a minute, I see a couple minutes ago, Christine asked a question as well of, does anyone know how MSU's packaging degree includes EPR in their curriculum? And the only piece to that I can mention is that I know there's a sustainable packaging course, and we have partnered with that professor, to include some just a presentation from us, and when we're able to, a tour as well. But I'm not sure, and maybe if someone else from MSU is on the line, or Leah, if you know anything from fellow students.
Yeah, I'm not super sure. I work with a few of the professors from like the packaging and School of Packaging and Design. Yeah, I don't know how much they talk about EPR or circular economy. They're definitely thinking about it, but I'm not sure how much that's like actually integrated into their curriculum. I will say that the Recycling Center is a great hub of knowledge around this type of stuff, and my 3 years at MSU alone, I have seen like that educational outreach, much thanks to Katie and Chris and Dave and all of the other people at the Recycling Center, start to breach more into these classes. I don't know, keep up the great work. I will praise the Recycling Center until I die, I guess.
Well, we're glad that you were able to come and work with us and enjoy it and learn enough to get interested if you were already, but and yeah, I think that it's a great point that getting more integrated in the curriculum is definitely a goal of mine since I started with the Surplus from Recycling Center. So more down the line on that. And just on this note, I would just like to make a pitch for a library resource guide that we partnered with a couple librarians at MSU to create, and it's on environmental justice and sustainable purchasing. And in a minute here, I'll drop the link in the chat. And it just provides some more information on topics that we've covered tonight, and some links and a couple interesting videos that you might find useful or just interesting for your own personal sake. So I'll put that link in the chat here. Just like to open up, does anybody else have any follow-up questions or like to make any comments about the topic? No? Okay. See, here's that resource guide. I'll put that in there. So just like to kind of wrap up then, Leah, would you like to put a button on any of the topics that you discussed tonight? We kind of brought up a few different things at the end there.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to reiterate that we need to move towards preventing waste rather than just mitigating waste, and that we as consumers, I think we should be trying to do everything that we can to live sustainably, but like ultimately we don't have the same power to make change that these other parts of the supply chain do. So we need to advocate for responsibility of these other parts. And I appreciate and applaud each and every one of you for coming out tonight to like learn about this and for doing your part and trying to understand, because I know it's really overwhelming. So yeah, thank you for having me. I love talking about this kind of stuff, so I'm really flattered by the opportunity.
Thanks, Leah. We were really glad that you were able to speak on this topic. It's something that has come up before in a couple of our events and conversations. And so, yeah, we thought of you and CCED and your research there just to speak on this more in depth. And thank you for sharing that. And also, if you could please put the link to your 5-minute YouTube summary of your research. I know it's on the CCED website as well, so we can drop that main link in there too for the center. So also for tonight, we have a event survey. If you would take a minute after we close to click that link and provide your feedback. We would like to make these as enjoyable and informative for you as possible. Next, we have our June town hall scheduled for the 24th of next month. We will have a guest speaker next month as well. We'll be joined by Karen O'Brien, who's the executive director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition. That is a group that is been advocating for recycling and composting interests statewide. And she'll be speaking on the importance of Michigan's solid waste policy and what that means for recycling, reuse, and composting efforts statewide. So I'm going to drop that information in the chat as well. And we partner with Broad Art Museum once a month to do a studio in process upcycle edition. And that event is happening on June 10th. It's a Facebook Live event where we do a demonstration. Britta Ernest from the Broad Art Museum leads a demonstration on an upcycle project, and we toss in some facts and resources regarding the materials that are used during that project. And lastly, as a thank you for engaging with us tonight, we would like to give you a 15% off coupon for the surplus store. So this coupon, we have a code here in the chat as well, and it is valid until the end of the month. And you would just type that in at the checkout on the surplus store website online store. With that, I would like to just say thank you very much again to everybody who came out tonight. Really appreciate you taking time from your day to join us on this topic, especially, you know, after we've been doing a lot of online events lately and the weather's starting to get a bit nice. It is cold, but also very much appreciative, Leah, of you coming and sharing your research, your knowledge, and your enthusiasm for these efforts. Always nice to hear that from you, and we all wish you the best of luck, I'm sure, in your future endeavors, and we'll be looking for you to make some more waves down the line.
Thank you.
And if anybody would like to say any last minute things or ask questions, we'll be here for a few minutes. I'm going to leave it up so that anyone who wants to get the chat box or any links from there, you know, you can do that. So everyone else, have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you next month. Thanks a lot. Nice to see your face, Robin.